My name is Joshua Wentz, and today I'm going to be talking about my experience teaching English at a university in Saudi Arabia. But of course, there is a disclaimer to this because what happened to me is not likely to be typical of the Saudi teaching experience because there's no such thing as a typical Saudi teaching experience. So, in order to leave a full and thorough highlight of my brief experience with teaching in the Tragic Kingdom, I must discuss three different subheadings. Okay, I got to talk about the recruiter, the company, and the university. So, a little bit about me. At the time I accepted this position, I had about 6 years of EFL teaching experience. I taught in the Republic of Georgia, the People's Republic of China, that's mainland China. I did some online teaching and a little bit in the USA before departing for Saudi Arabia. I have a master's degree from the University of Michigan, 140-hour TEFL certification. And before I first went abroad, I'd spent about 4 years as a full-time substitute teacher back in Michigan. So, first of all, to start the hiring process, I had to deal with a recruiter. I do understand that this is common practice for teaching assignments in the Middle East. The name of the company which acted as the intermediary is English Today Recruitment. This company is based out of Oman. The interview scheduling took a little while, finagling with the time change. I was in America, they were in Oman. Um, but when it was finally set up, my interview only lasted a few minutes. I want to say less than 10 minutes. In that interview, he asked about my intercultural adaptability, excuse me, and how I would deal with students who wanted their grades changed. I guess the interview went well enough. I was offered the teaching position shortly thereafter. Then the recruiter put me in touch with a visa agent in New York City. They told me that going through a business visa would be a lot easier than applying for the residence permit, which is known as an Iqama. And they basically put all of the paperwork associated with this project process completely with me. I did it with a little questions and prepared to send in my passport for the visa. But first, I thought since I'm going to be spending 2 semesters in Saudi Arabia, I should have a holiday. So I decided to treat my mom to a trip to Niagara Falls. She'd never been there, I'd never been there, and it was great. But according to the calendar, I still had a few weeks leeway if I were willing to put in for express processing, which really was no problem. Around that time of the summer, the annual Hajj was about to begin. That's the pilgrimage to Mecca. The visa agent did inform me that as long as I had all the materials before a certain date, they were in his office, the visa could easily be processed before the Saudi officials at the New York City consulate left on their pilgrimage. I ensured everything would be received by his office. I had to do some express shipping to get it there, but it got there on time. While my passport was in limbo, waiting for the visa, I began communicating with the company. Um, as it turns out, the day the recruiter gave me for the start of the semester was actually 10 days later than the new academic year began. So, of course, the company was very eager and excited to get my visa information so that they could book my flight and we could all get to work molding eager young minds in their pursuit of English fluency. After receiving the consulate's approval, I received an email, which was CC'd to the company, with a picture of my actual business visa. The company waited a few days, then booked my flight to Saudi Arabia. At this point, I did discover I would be in the city of Abha, which is in Asir province, close to the Red Sea and kind of close to the Yemeni border. The latter fact did kind of concern me a bit, but research in that area found that Asir has a great climate because it's high. The altitude's about 2,000 meters above sea level, and it's beyond the recommended exclusion zone of staying away from the war zone. It's more than 100 miles from the Yemen border. So the U.S. State Department said that it would be safe, And as long as the humanitarian crisis in Yemen stayed in Yemen, no problem. So some time passed. I didn't get my passport back. A few days before my flight was scheduled, I started getting up and walking to the post office to see if I could intercept the envelope with my passport. Still had not arrived. The day I was scheduled to depart, September 5, passport still wasn't in the post office. So I had to write the company, email them, and say, you need to cancel the flight because I don't have my passport back, which is quite embarrassing. Then later that week, September 5th was a Wednesday. On Friday, the manager of the post office called me because I had been going every day to let me know that my letter had arrived. Then I went to go pick it up. The postmark on the envelope showed that the letter did not leave New York City. It had sat on the visa agent's desk for more than a week after he had received my info back from the consulate. I was originally set to depart on September 5th, and that was the day that my letter was shipped. The email with the visa information was received on August 30th. So over a week, this thing sat on the guy's desk, which I really don't understand. And the visa agent completely denied all responsibility for having my passport sit on his desk for a week. My new departure date was then set for the 11th of September, going to Saudi Arabia on the 11th of September. I should probably tell you about how the experience went, right? Okay, so that was dealing with the recruiter and the visa agent. Moving on to the company. As most Western educators in Saudi Arabia can testify, we don't actually work for the university. Instead, we work for a company which is hired by the university to bring in foreign experts. The name of the company that hired me is Al-Khalij. It has several different branches and university contracts throughout the kingdom. I think they're in maybe 8 universities or so. And the head office is, of course, in Riyadh. I was assigned to King Khalid University in Abha. They had originally booked my flight all the way through to Abha, but then due to the changes, thanks to our friendly visa agent, needed to book and make a new different flight. It did kind of work out in my favor because the first ticket had an overnight layover in Riyadh, and this one only had about 7 hours in Riyadh. Taking away that layover didn't take away all the troubles. As it happens, the company didn't pay for the luggage allowance on my USA flights. I needed to fly from Michigan to Chicago to Dulles in Washington, D.C., and I had to pay for my checked bag on the domestic carriers. The company still owes me $30, and since I'm out of Saudi Arabia, I don't think I'm ever going to get it. When I arrived in Abha, I met with the project manager. He was waiting for me and another teacher who arrived on the same flight with me. I found it a little strange that we were meeting in a small hotel, so my colleague asked when we would be moving to our permanent surroundings in the complex. Well, we wouldn't. We were in a tiny hotel out in the middle of nowhere. The locals always said it was a bad neighborhood, and they would be our living arrangements for the full calendar year, for the academic year. Abha does have a lot of foreigner complexes. Some of them are military, but not all of them. So it seems to me, and I don't know all the facts, that this kind of setup is designed to maximize the company's profit, while at the same time, greasing some palms from the hotel owner. Additionally, there's kind of a negative psychological component of living in an entire year in what's clearly temporary, uncomfortable housing. I mean, it lacked basic amenities like a kitchen, a laundry. The Wi-Fi went out 5 times a day, and even the furniture was small and uncomfortable. So that was not helpful. The company, of course, is also responsible for salary. Those people on business visas need to get a paper check in the mail every month. When I did my interview and I received information before departure, the literature expressly stated in exact English terms that the company may may be full of humans, but they will respect the salary and pay workers on time every time on or before the 29th of each month, except for February. This was not the case. I needed to wait almost a week every single month after the people with the commas got their pay into their direct deposit accounts before the checks would arrive. And 3 times over the 8 months, the teachers with residence permits were paid late. And whenever they were paid late, my salary would be delayed. Okay? But then finally, after the paper checks come, everyone who has a business visa would have to take a trip to the bank to cash these checks. And as a result, you would have a month's worth of cash in your hand. It was very interesting in the first month because they ran out of big bills. So one of my colleagues had a big stack of like 50s, literally like this big. One time, though, when we went to go cash our checks, the bank's computers were down. So they couldn't do anything. We couldn't cash our checks. And of course, that was when the pay was delayed. Go back a day later, the bank had run out of cash. So again, couldn't cash our checks. I was also told during the interview that I expressly pointed out that I needed to transfer money back to America, and I was told that it would be no problem on a business visa. Well, there was a problem every single time. The Saudis generally don't work well with irregular situations, and a business visa is not the same as an Iqama. They would generally simply refuse service. So putting in the paperwork to do wire transfer on a business visa was like work that required creative thinking skills. So they generally didn't do it, even though the company that worked with Western Union charged just outrageous service fees, something like 10% or more to send money back to America. So I don't really understand why they didn't like profit. The company also provided monthly excursions so that we could learn about the local culture, the local history. It only happened 3 times, twice in the fall semester and once in the spring. We did not learn about the local culture. We did not learn about the history. All we did was drive to the top of the mountains and take photos. Normally this might be nice, but everywhere you go in Saudi Arabia, there is plastic and garbage everywhere. At the spring excursion, we were provided a meal, which was very useful, probably because the project manager was with us that time. But in the first excursion, which happened around the Saudi National Day, no one had gotten paid yet, and we had to buy our own food. We even had to make our own itinerary. Luckily, one of the teachers is Iraqi and spoke fluent Arabic and helped arrange the activities pretty well. But we did want to go to a mall and were not allowed to entry because of dress code violations. Some people were wearing shorts. I had a backpack. They just wouldn't let us in with family time. And one final concern was friction between the company and the university. The project manager and the dean of foreign languages don't like each other, so communication was poor at best. And a byproduct of this friction was the fact that the university did not regularly pay the company for the use of their foreign experts. At one point, with the late salaries, we found out that the university owed over a year of salaries to the company. So this communication crevasse led to salary delays. It also leads to logistical problems inside the classroom because the company would be telling us one thing, but the university saying something else to the students. Generally, the students would have more information about their semester, their grading, their testing, their schedule than the teachers. So it was a difficult time preparing them. Which finally brings me to the university itself. King Khalid University does have more than one campus in Abha, and most of us were not working at the main campus. Instead, we were at an intensive English campus, which was even further out into the sticks, almost nothing around there. I mean, in the mountains behind the university, you could often see troops of baboons running around. And of course, if you've ever looked at what current and former teachers have to say about the quality of students in Arabia, The absolute same applies to this campus. So they're studying engineering and medicine, so they know they need English, but it's not actually emphasized in learning communicative and even academic English. Students can just go complain to the dean and they can have their grades changed. They can miss a quarter of their classes and still sit for the final exams in a foreign language. And at the end of the semester, when you're doing grade verification, if it's within about 5 points, it will be moved up to the next mark. So obviously this is not proper education, and it generally shows for most of the student body when they move on to the regular university and they can't really perform under actual stringent higher education standards. In the second semester, the university administration decided to change the student textbooks. Now, this was actually a great choice. The book they had been using was in service for more than 12 years. It was focused almost exclusively on the grammar aspect of language learning, with very few, almost no practical exercises in speaking. The book was antiquated. It was not helping the students in any meaningful way, really. And as a result, they needed additional courses in reading, listening, medicine for the medical students, and they needed a specially designed writing packet in order to help them learn how to write and gain a legitimate university second language experience, which, being the Middle East, is still far short of normal expectations in the rest of the industrialized world. So honestly, a change in curriculum was overdue, probably by at least 5 years. But they made this change in a not so great way. They didn't notify staff. As far as we knew, it was a last-minute decision. We got back from the 1-week winter break and were informed that the university had decided to change to a Cambridge University Press book designed exclusively for teaching EFL in the Middle East using 4 language skills: reading, writing, speaking, and listening. This book also included some supplemental online materials for more study opportunities for the students. It was the last in that edition, the first edition, before Cambridge introduced the second edition. Based on the 8 months in my country and the cynicism I developed over that time, again, I was believing that someone at the university was getting their palms greased to take some of Cambridge's excess stock off of the bookshelves. Time will only tell if this next semester, if they decide to photocopy and regurgitate the same first edition books, or buy the second edition books. My guess is first editions will be back next year. The idea behind the curriculum change was well-meaning but poorly implemented, like almost all of the decisions I saw the administration take. Because of the 11th hour negotiations, the first week of classes were totally missed. The textbooks had not arrived. They just weren't ready for students. In the next week, we again lost 3 days of classes because we didn't have any books, and we had to go to a meeting with the representatives from Cambridge, as well as the president of the university. These meetings were mostly a waste of time. They didn't provide much information. Honestly, it was basically a sales pitch about books the university already bought. Finally, when classes could begin, almost 10 school days late, still not enough textbooks had arrived. I never received a paper copy. I had to use my iPad and a digital copy to help teach my students all semester. The details for accessing and using the online components were delayed for a few weeks and oftentimes completely ignored by the students. Even then, after all the students had received the books, the library finally got enough books. It was found, unsurprisingly, that a lot of the books had fake access codes to these supplemental materials. So the university was supposed to provide a workaround this, but I don't know if it ever happened, because at the end of the semester, they just gave all the students full marks on the online materials, whether or not they tried. But that's a lot of negative stuff. On a positive note about Saudi Arabia, the salary was good and generally paid, sometimes late. Although at this point, it is June. I've been out of the country for more than a month. Ramadan is over, and I'm still waiting my final settlement. I hope it will come this week, but I've been hoping that for a month now. The low cost of living in Saudi Arabia allowed you to take most of your earnings to go towards savings, unless you like to spend money on things you don't need, like shopping for a bunch of electronics and gadgets. Personally, I felt I had nice and good coworkers. They were dedicated to their work in spite of all the difficulties of the region. A lot of the Islamic colleagues did very well and enjoyed being so close to the epicenter of their religion. Some even made monthly visits to Mecca. It was only about 8 hours away, so they were happy to go pray at the mosque there, or whatever it's called. Sorry. So, in summary, people do choose to work in the Middle East for a variety of reasons. Saudi Arabia, even more so. Everyone was there for different reasons. I don't really regret losing almost a year of my life, but I definitely did enough research beforehand to expect difficulties. This is simply highlighting some of the problems which I personally encountered, and they probably will not replicate to someone else. What happens to one person in the Middle East doesn't necessarily happen to the guy next to him. So if you're interested in teaching English in Saudi, somewhere from 0 of these concerns to all of them might apply to you. So thank you for watching and listening. It's a little bit long, but I did like to highlight my experience in the Middle East.